Hello everybody, this is a new video aiming to demonstrate the double standards and lack of scientific understanding in the Darwin circus. Here we will focus on the apparent confusion between microevolution and macroevolution.
The reason for the difference between the public understanding and the academic understanding of Darwinian evolution is simply not the fact that there is always a difference between the public understanding and the academic understanding in a scientific theory. It's not simply as simple as that. With Darwinism, there is a concerted you can call it dawah, an evangelical propaganda campaign to actually confuse the masses.
Of course, he starts off spouting his usual conspiracy theory, though no evidence is ever presented to back this up. I think I know who is deliberately trying to confuse the masses.
Now, although I don't like to use the terms macro and microevolution, for the purposes of this video, I will actually use those terms to illustrate a point. Now, online and offline, there is a point that's being made by Darwinists. Microevolution, which is small-scale evolutionary changes, like the peppered moth example, is the same as macroevolution, a monad to a man, right?
It is the same underlying process. Microevolution is the term for short-term gradual change within populations, while macroevolution is the term for long-term gradual change of species. Given time, microevolutionary changes become macroevolutionary changes.
Now, this idea that micro and macro is the same thing is something that no Darwinist online and offline can say we don't use as an argument. They do actually use this as an argument. In fact, if you're to watch any of their videos, this is going to come up again and again. What's the evidence that natural selection can lead to this major biological structure, this novel problem that we're facing? How do we know that natural selection did this? Well, we have these small-scale evolutionary changes, and these small-scale evolutionary changes over a long period of time can, of course, do this. So micro is equal to macro. It's just the same thing. Now this, of course, as I've been pointing out, is a fallacy of equivocation. It's not the same thing. However, they do not like to admit that. They like to continuously repeat the same narrative, just keep parroting the same narrative.
It is the same underlying mechanism as I have explained. The difference relates to the timescale and the degree of changes, with macroevolution creating new species. As an analogy, imagine you're going out for a walk. A long walk and a short walk involve the same process, putting one foot in front of the other. Microevolution is like a short walk, staying in your own neighborhood, whereas macroevolution is a long walk that takes you into the next neighborhood.
Macro is micro, micro is micro. Now what I'd like to do is this. I would like to use one of the founders of the modern synthesis, Theodosius Dobzhansky. And this is what he says about micro and macroevolution. For this reason, we are compelled at the present level of knowledge, reluctantly, to put a sign of equality between the mechanisms of macro and microevolution, and proceeding on this assumption, to push our investigations as far ahead as this working hypothesis will admit. So clearly, macro and microevolution for Theodosius Dobzhansky is not the same thing. He realizes you can't just go from, okay, we've got these small-scale evolutionary changes, therefore this large-scale evolutionary structure or whatever it is can actually take place.
Nobody ever said it was the same thing, just that the underlying mechanism is the same. Your second statement was a big jump which did not follow from what Dobzhansky said. I see you quoted from the 1937 edition of his book. Had you even bothered to look at the 1951 version of his book, you will see what he says. The words microevolution and macroevolution are relative terms and have only descriptive meaning. They imply no difference in the underlying causal agencies.
So why is it that still we equate or we hear that micro is the same as macro? And the reason is simple. The vast majority of people will never go through the academic literature. The vast majority of people only know surface level knowledge, and in fact when somebody is listening to a lecture and they see an authority, they see someone big like Richard Dawkins, Jerry Coyne, Aron Ra, or PZ Myers or whoever, and they're speaking with passion and we've worked it out and this is the solution and we know what we're doing, then the average person, the average atheist, the average agnostic, they're just going to be like, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, these guys know what they're talking about. What do these religious people know anyway? And what I find strange is these are the same people who say we should be skeptical, we should question, we should be free thinkers, we should challenge everything, we should rebel against religious authority. Fair enough. Why don't you apply that to Darwinism? Why do you just accept it like sheep? Whatever they say, you just accept like sheep. In fact, you see a lot of these refutation videos online. Debunked. This person debunked. This religious person debunked. I am yet to see a Darwinist being debunked by one of these atheist popularizers. Just debunk one of their poor arguments. Say this is what's happening. Why does a Muslim have to do it?
You don't debunk anything. You just demonstrate your lack of understanding. There is no sacred cow that cannot be criticized in science. If you find scientists from a broad range of disciplines agreeing on a well-supported theory like evolution, then it's probably because they accept the overwhelming evidence. There are in fact still discussions about evolutionary theory, as science is always learning new things. Let's see if he understands the difference between microevolution and macroevolution in other videos.
हाँ देखें, अब मिसाल के तौर पर मैं स्टूडेंट हूँ और मैं सिंसियर स्टूडेंट हूँ और मैं देखना चाह रहा हूँ और मेरे सामने इतना ज़्यादा ये डाटा पड़ा। अब डाटा ये है कि अच्छा ये देखो हमारे लग रहा है कि हाँ ये स्टेजेस हैं, ये पॉसिबल है कि हमारी स्टेजेस ये लिंक्ड हैं, ठीक है, और ये माइक्रो लेवल पर हम बिल्कुल देख सकते हैं अपनी आंखों से कि ये बैक्टीरिया जो है वो इवॉल्व हो रहा है, उसकी स्ट्रेन इवॉल्व हुई हम ऑब्जर्व कर सकते हैं, हमारे पास वीडियो एविडेंसेस हैं। लेकिन हम किस बेसिस पे हम जाके इसके मैक्रो लेवल को हम डिनाई कर रहे हैं और क्यों कर रहे हैं डिनाई? ये अगर मेरे जहन में सवाल आता है, ठीक है, तो इसका क्या आप कहते हैं, क्या जवाब है? कि देखें ना, ठीक है, यहाँ छोटे लेवल पर हो रही है, तो ये इवेंचुअली हमने बाकी चीज़ें भी देख रहे हैं, हम बोन्स देख रहे हैं कि इसमें कुछ ऐसी बोन्स हैं जो कि डार्विन ने अपने बुक जो है उसके अंदर भी लिखा कि द ग्रेटेस्ट शो ऑन अर्थ में, कि मतलब कि ये देखें हमारे पास ये पीसेज ऑफ एविडेंसेस हैं कि ये पहले फलानी स्पीशीज़ हैं और ये उनके एवोल्यूशन के ट्रेड पीछे रह गए और ये वाले स्पीशी है वही जो माइक्रो एवोल्यूशन वाला मैकेनिज्म है वो इस बड़े लेवल पर भी हो रहा है। तो अब वो सब ये बहुत
पावरफुल आर्गुमेंट है। नहीं डेफिनेटली
तो आप इसके बारे में क्या कहते हैं?
इसके बारे में मैं अपनी सोच नहीं देता, मैं देता हूँ जो एक्चुअल डिस्कशन साइंसदानों के अंदर होगी।
हाँ जी।
अब जो प्रोपेगेंडा 150 ईयर्स के लिए हमें बताया जा रहा है कि डार्विनियन इवोल्यूशन प्रूव हो गई है, ऑलरेडी प्रूव हो गई है, यानी जो एक्सेप्ट, मैं अगर इसकी एनालॉजी दूँ ये है, हमास भाई हमें जाना है आपकी गाड़ी में यहाँ से सियालकोट, जा सकते हैं, पेट्रोल डालेंगे, रोड सीधी है, ठीक है, अगर हम 5 मील जा सकते हैं आपकी गाड़ी में, 50 मील जा सकते हैं, लॉजिकल, माइक्रो मैक्रो। मगर अगर मैं कहूँ यार मैं आपकी गाड़ी में बैठ के मैं चांद जाना चाहता हूँ, जा सकते हैं? 5 मील जा सकते हैं, 50 मील जा सकते हैं, तो 5000 मील क्यों नहीं जा सकते? क्या मसला है?
This demonstrates the sheer depths of his misunderstanding. He thinks microevolution is taking a car journey on the road, whereas macroevolution is trying to drive your car to the moon.
Animal body plans.
He talks about animal body plans not being able to go from micro to macroevolution without giving any evidence to justify this statement. We have in fact a good understanding of the evolution of animal body plans.
एक चूंटी को आप ब्रीड करें.
He gives a poor example of breeding ants to demonstrate his point without providing any evidence to back up his claims. A better example is to look at mice and rats. They share the same common ancestor, having diverged about 18 million years ago. That ancestor would have been subjected to microevolutionary changes which accumulated over time and eventually resulted in speciation to mice and rats which are unable to interbreed. This is macroevolution.
बात यह है कि माइक्रो इक्वल्स मैक्रो इसी तरह है जिस तरह मैं कहूँगा चलो अगर मेरी गाड़ी 5 मील जा सकती है, 50 मील जा सकती है, 5000 मील भी जा सकती है और वर्टिकली जा सकती है. Two different directions की बात. Let's look at their claim. There's so much evidence for macroevolution, right? And if you actually ask them, what is your evidence for macroevolution? They will say, well, microevolution, because if you can walk 5 miles, you can walk 500 miles. So the essential argument is if small scale changes plus long deep time equals massive changes over a long period of time. That's their basic argument.
Now, there's some serious issues with this. The first one is the fallacy of equivocation. So what this is doing is this is equivocating two different types of processes. Microevolutionary processes cannot be equated to macroevolutionary processes.
Yes, they can. It's the same underlying process, just over a longer time scale. Can you demonstrate a different process that works on a microevolutionary but not macroevolutionary scale and vice versa?
So when it comes to, okay, think of it this way. Let's, Paul Nelson, who I just had on my channel.
Yeah, that's true.
He gave a very good analogy if you were watching, since you were watching, brother Eden. He gave the analogy that, you see, when we think of, Darwinian evolution, it's like a plane flying, and when the plane is flying in mid-air, you change the components of the engine. But you change them in such a way that you don't cause a disruption that the plane comes down and crashes. So there's a constraint on what's possible. It's a really good analogy. Yeah. You can't have you have a principle of continuity. You can't have, let's just stop, let's just restart. No. You have that constraint throughout.
And just tell them who he is.
Yes. Very, very good point. Paul Nelson is a philosopher of biology.
Paul Nelson is a fellow of the Discovery Institute and is noted for his advocacy of the pseudosciences of young Earth creationism and intelligent design. Nobody should take anything he says seriously. The rest of this video goes off topic, but I had to leave in this hilarious segment of Mohammed Hijab talking about land mammals evolving into whales and lungs turning into gills, completely not understanding that as mammals, whales have lungs. Subboor did not correct him on this, as I suspect he is equally clueless.
His book, Devil's Illusion, where he talks about the transformation. And to be crude, obviously we're not talking about a cow and a whale, but he talks about transformation of a mammal, a land mammal like a cow, to a whale.
Yeah.
And he asks this beautiful question. And the way he puts it is, I'm not, if you haven't, and if anyone hasn't seen this, you go and check this out. His name is David Belinsky, and the way he talks about the cow, I don't know if it's on YouTube or something, but it's so powerful. It requires a reaction video between me and you. It's very powerful on your channel. But basically, he says that how many transformations need to be made from a cow to become a whale? Like, let's just think about it. Is it he asked the question, he goes 10,000, 20,000, 50,000? How many transformations, right? And then he goes back to, I think, what you were saying about this whole plane and changing the engine in midair and so on like that. It's got to be movements so much, because obviously...
It's constraints.
Yeah, the constraints. But here's the constraint issue becomes even more pronounced when we're talking about moving from lung to gill.
Yes.
Now think about that for a second. I mean, when I first thought about that, it really made me think the amount of faith that these Darwinians have.
Yeah.
And on that note, we can conclude that Subboor Ahmad and Mohammed Hijab are clueless about biology, and whatever they say about micro and macro evolution should be ignored due to their lack of understanding. For an excellent half-hour explanation of micro and macro evolution, please watch this video by Aron Ra. I will link it in the description. This topic was suggested to me by a viewer. If you have a topic or a particular video that you would like me to debunk, please let me know. Thank you for watching this video, and please let me know what you think in the comments section.